Star of Providence is the latest game released by Dunkeys publishing company, Big Mode. I'm a pretty big fan of Dunkey, and their previous game, Animal Well, was, in my opinion, one of the greatest games of all time. So, to say that I was pretty excited for Star of Providence would be a mild understatement. Unfortunately, as much as I wanted to enjoy this game, I was overall quite disappointed. Star of Providence suffers from a number of major flaws that significantly hinder all aspects of gameplay. There are 5 such flaws, 4 of which I will cover today. The 5th is the most severe, but it's also the hardest to explain, so I'll dedicate an entire video to that, maybe. Overall, Star of Providence is unbalanced, visually messy, it has a tedious difficulty curve, and it lacks any form of variety between runs. But let's start with the simplest. This game is not balanced. Certain options are simply more powerful than the others. One instance of this are the upgrades you find on each floor. You get to pick one of 3 different power-ups, but most of the time the choice is kind of made for you. You might be offered an upgrade like Weatherproof, which might save 1 hit point across an entire run, next to an upgrade like Quickening, which revives you after dying and shoots lasers at all enemies in the room and gives you a damage increase. These 2 options are not even remotely close in terms of power. I think I've taken Weatherproof maybe a single time, while I try to get Quickening in almost every run. Now, these 2 upgrades are a particularly polarizing example, but there's a pretty stark binary between the upgrades that are good and the ones that are not. Similarly, the weapons are not balanced. In Star of Providence, when you find a weapon, you usually get to pick between a number of different options. There's, machine guns, revolvers, drills, spears, but what you learn very quickly is that some of the weapon types are far superior to the others. The sword, for example, has comparable damage to all other weapons, while also giving you a massive defensive field that clears away nearby enemy bullets with every swing. There's also the razor, which I personally found to be the strongest weapon by far, boasting not only the highest damage, but perplexingly also the best ammo efficiency. Furthermore, the razor blades pierce, making it fantastic for clearing rooms full of smaller enemies, something which most other weapons struggle with. Compare that to something like the Vulcan, which is a weapon that often feels indistinguishable from the crappy default pea shooter that you start with. In theory, being able to choose which weapon type you want to use sounds like it could be fun, but in my experience with the game, the different options were always so wildly imbalanced that I was either choosing the obvious correct answer or shooting myself in the foot. This problem of imbalance also extends to the enemies. At the end of each floor, you fight one of 4 different bosses for that level, but there's always one of the 4 that's either way easier or way harder than the rest. Out of the 4 bosses in floor 1, there's Chamberlord and Ringleader, who are fairly easy, Guardian, who is basically free, and then Grinder, who is significantly harder than the other 3, and his fight lasts about twice as long thanks to his razor shields. Or you can also look at floor 4, where Nightmare and Firewall are an order of magnitude more difficult and frustrating than their peers. But it's not just that some enemies are stronger than others, a lot of bosses are internally inconsistent. Microcore is the best example of this. Some of his attacks are pretty reasonable, others feel like they would be appropriate for the final boss. Depending on which attacks he happens to use, Microcore can fluctuate between a tough challenge and an instant loss. The weird thing about Microcore specifically is that he's an optional enemy. You can choose to fight him in order to get more rewards. But his difficulty fluctuates so wildly that he's never worth fighting. It's just far too risky, because if he happens to use his hardest attacks, you'll probably just die then and there. Compare this to the Gauntlet, which is another optional challenge you can choose to do. There's basically no reason not to do the Gauntlet because it's so rewarding. You'd expect these 2 different challenges to be comparable in difficulty, but they aren't even remotely close. One is a no-brainer and the other will end your run. Even just the normal rooms are very inconsistent in how challenging they are. If you look at the final floor, some rooms are a complete joke, easier than the tutorial, while others are so chaotic that taking damage is basically mandatory. This is also true of other games like Enter the Gungeon, but these games have systems in place to mitigate this variety. For example, Gungeon's weapon system subtly makes easy rooms harder and hard rooms easier, which means that the perceived difficulty is very stable. In Gungeon, you collect a number of different weapons at once that you can switch between, but the stronger a weapon is, the less ammo it has. The scarcity of this ammo means that you want to save it for when you really need it, meaning that on easier rooms, you'll want to switch to a weaker weapon with more ammo in order to conserve your powerful guns. This maintains a healthy equilibrium. If a room is easy, you'll switch to a weaker weapon to save ammo, making it harder. And if a room is hard, then you have an excuse to use your expensive ammo in order to make it easier. Now, Star of Providence also has a weapon system, but you cannot switch between different weapons until very late into the game, meaning that you often end up wasting a rare weapon against easy, unthreatening nobodies. Very frustrating. In fact, all of this combines to make Star of Providence quite frustrating. It often feels like you lose a run due to bad luck rather than bad play. This is exacerbated by the fact that the game is visually messy. The sprites for enemy projectiles are so varied that it's often a challenge just to decipher what is a threat and what is not. Compare this to Enter the Gungeon, which is similarly hectic. Despite how delirious Gungeon can get, a threat is never ambiguous. All enemy bullets are always the same color, red and white, so you always know what to avoid. Star of Providence doesn't have the same vigilance. Enemy projectiles can be any color of the rainbow, often a similar color to the background, or even your own bullets. And it doesn't help that the further you get into the game, the more the screen is cluttered with obstacles of different shapes and shades, further hurting the visual clarity. Honestly, most of this game's flaws become more apparent the further you get into it. It's not just the clarity, the difficulty curve is also really problematic. The Floor 5 boss presents a significant spike in difficulty, which is quite jarring at first, but once you acclimate to it, then the rest of the game becomes quite mundane. This is an interesting example of how Star of Providence is held back by its roguelike structure. The first 5 floors are so easy in comparison to the late game that they don't present any real threat to an experienced player, even on hard mode. But because Star of Providence is a roguelike, you have to sit through these 5 easy floors every run, just to get back to the part of the game you're interested in. Having to tolerate this tedious slog every single time does a lot of damage to the pace of the game. And the thing is, I don't really know why this game is a roguelike at all. It doesn't really benefit from the looping structure, and there's such little variety between runs that the repetition becomes, well, repetitive. I've already explained how the power imbalance means that you often end up using the same few weapons and upgrades every run, but the different options also provide next to no real change in gameplay. The most unique upgrade is Blink, which turns your dash into a teleport. This dramatically alters how you play and think about the game. It's a lot of fun, but it's the only upgrade that does this. All the others are more passive buffs that work in the background, giving you more damage, more ammo, more bombs, etc. They make you more powerful, but they do nothing to alter the strategy of the player. Weapons also have little practical distinction. For all but one of them, you just point towards the enemy you want to kill. The result of this action is distinct for each weapon. They fire different projectiles, but ultimately, you're doing the same thing. You're just pointing towards the enemy. Once again, you're using the same strategy regardless of context. This wouldn't be much of an issue for any normal game, but the fact that Star of Providence is a roguelike means that you end up experiencing these flaws over and over. Every single run, you end up fighting the same enemies in the same ways, with the same weapons and the same upgrades. It becomes quite grating and monotone. It loses a lot of its luster very quickly. You do eventually unlock different characters to play as, but they only mildly shake up the gameplay. I personally felt like it was too little too late. The thing about the roguelike genre is that it's almost like a cheat code, because it is a fantastic tool for easily transforming a short burst of fulfilling combat into a longer, repeatable experience. It's an easy way to turn gameplay into a game. That's why you see roguelikes everywhere nowadays. But it's important to remember that the roguelike structure isn't something you can just slap on anything without thinking about it at all. It's a tool that serves one specific purpose, not a cure-all. Star of Providence serves as a very interesting example of a game that suffers from being a roguelike. I genuinely think that Star of Providence's biggest problems would be solved if it was completely linear, with perhaps similar structure to a game like Dark Souls. The looping nature of the roguelike genre only really directs the player's attention towards the game's biggest problems. Ultimately, this review is harsh. It's very harsh. I'm holding this game to a standard of near perfection, which is hardly fair. Now, this is just kind of how I am with everything. I'm kind of a huge, unforgiving asshole. But I feel like with Star of Providence specifically, it's more fair to hold it to this inane level of scrutiny. Partly because it was so hyped up by Dunkey, but mostly because it is being published alongside Animal Well. Basically, my biggest problem with Star of Providence is that it isn't Animal Well, which doesn't make sense because it isn't trying to be Animal Well. But it also isn't as good as Animal Well, which is kind of a shame. I mean, wouldn't it be so fucking awesome if this game was as good as Animal Well? I know this review has been super negative, but I don't intend any hate towards Dunkey or the developers of the game. Despite its flaws, it's clear that this game is a product of love and passion. So, although I didn't really enjoy my time with it, I'm quite excited to see what the team does next. Also, it's not like the game is all bad. I think the pixel art is really pretty. Anyway, I don't mean to state the obvious, but it would really help me out if you could subscribe. I'm trying to turn this channel into a career, and you are truly the only ones that can make this happen. So